Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to be talking about ND filters. A lot of you guys have questions about ND filters. Some of you guys may be interested in using ND filters, don't really know what they are for. So I'm going to kind of go over this as quickly as possible, kind of like a quick and dirty style of why I use ND filters, and not go into like the whole scientific portion of it, but explain to you guys basically what it does. So the ND filter is basically blocking the light that is coming into the lens if you are using a certain shutter speed. Usually what you want to do is go into your manual settings on your GoPro, and if you want to get really nice footage with a decent amount of motion blur, kind of like more of like the cinematic feel, or just like a, you know, your brain can only process so much of like a shutter speed. Usually they have like a 180-degree rule in like movies on using a shutter speed, because that's what your brain basically processes. So that's why I'm staying away from like the scientific portion of it. You can go on YouTube, hear all this stuff, just type it in. So what you do is, if you are going to be flying say at 60 frames per second, 30 frames per second, whatever you choose, the rule of thumb is to double your shutter speed, so that way you get the correct amount of motion blur and everything that looks good. The problem with that is, if I go to 120 degrees shutter speed at 60 frames per second, which I'll show you, everything gets blown out. There's too much light is starting to come into the lens and you're overexposed. You don't want to be overexposed. In some cases it's okay to be, you know, if you're doing color correction, it's okay to be on the high side of, you know, a little overexposure, but you don't want to be much. What this does, it knocks down that exposure again, which gives you the correct look that you are going for the exposure, as well as the correct shutter speed you want for the right amount of motion blur. Now you can knock this down even more and say like, I'm 60 frames per second, I'm going to go to 60 frames, I'm sorry, 60 degrees on the shutter, and you will basically have a more motion blur, kind of like floaty effect and everything. That looks pretty good, but to some people it's a little nauseous with the mini quad stuff, but it gives you that nice, real smooth feel, which in some cases look pretty good. If you're doing a lot of long range flying and you're going up in the hills and you want that nice smooth look and not too much of that jello effect or anything like that, then, you know, knocking it down to the same amount of shutter speed as your frames per second might look pretty good. But for the most part, I run like an ND8 filter, I find at 60 frames per second on 120 degrees of shutter to be pretty much good for most conditions, like day like today where the sun's pretty bright, it's starting to come down, it's going to be right in your face, and you know, you want to get a nice good exposure but still have a nice decent amount of motion blur with the correct shutter speed. So make sure that, you know, your camera can handle going into manual mode and switching the shutter speed, because I have seen some people think that putting on a ND filter is just going to cure everything, like their jello or any like things that the oscillation and all that stuff's doing. No, that is not what this is for. This is for getting a certain look to your video. It does help that to some certain degree, but you cannot put your camera on auto shutter and still use the ND filter. It just doesn't work, because the camera is still making up for that. It's just thinking that there's a shadow on there. So just always remember, make sure your camera could do manual first, put it into the correct shutter speed for what you're doing. Usually it's always double, like I said, and go out there, rip, have fun, and you should have pretty good video footage. So I'm gonna put this on my quad now. I'm gonna show you a couple different examples of what it does, and hopefully that'll give you guys a good explanation about ND filters if you want to use them, or yeah, if you just want to pass on them. Okay, so I'm using the Hero 6 here, 2.7K, 60 frames per second on Super View. So we're going to be using an ND filter, and I'll show you like what it is like before the ND filter and everything through there. 120 degrees is what we need of shutter speed, because we got to double our frames per second. So you can see it's at 120. We're all set up now across the board, everything 120 frames per second, and you will see how blown out it looks without the ND filter. But we're gonna strap this on the quad, go fly, and I'll take you through the different basically looks that it has with the ND filter and everything on there, and you'll see why I use it. Alright, so we're just going to do a couple flights here, and you'll see how blown out everything is, especially going into the sun.
Sensor lost.
And now when we come back over here, you'll see how everything looks with the ND filter on. A lot more crispier, a lot better of look with the colors and everything. It's the right ND filter, basically the right shade for the shutter speed that you're going to be at. Gives the right amount of motion blur and overall better picture. All right, so now we're at 60 degrees shutter, and so this matches our frames per second, and you'll see that it just pretty much blurs and smoothens out everything to get a little bit more of a smoother image onto the camera. This gives it a nice smooth feel for everything. And this is what you want to use if it's really sunny or something, or you want a really nice smooth look to your footage. You want to use an ND with 120 degree shutter or 60 degrees to match, or whatever you're using for frames per second, whether it's 30-30, 60-60. This is what you want to use. So yeah, I wouldn't say it exactly always helps with jello. It's just it definitely doesn't hurt, but for the most part, this is why I use ND filters and when I use them. Now, if it were to get in the evening time and the sun was going down, yeah, I wouldn't be using this. Wouldn't have to. The GoPro on auto would be plenty of enough to use. Alright guys, so hopefully these examples kind of give you guys a better understanding on ND filters if you're looking to get into them, if you're using them already, or if you were using them incorrectly, how to properly use them now. And I think they're a great tool to have. It has been in my bag for about over a year now that I've been using ND filters, everything from taping auto tint on my lens to using like the TBS Jello Guard and using these Polar Pro little snap-on ones that I have for the GoPro Hero 6. These are good. They also have like a cinema series lenses, but those are like really expensive, and I feel like you don't want to put something that's too expensive on something that you're going to crash and break. But yeah, hopefully this is a good video. If you guys have any questions on ND filters or something that I didn't cover now, like I said, you could go into more research and the scientific portion of it. There's a lot of information on YouTube about it for using them in regular, just doing films or using it on a GoPro. Check it out. Leave me any comments if you do have any questions on how we're using it in our application, and give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you don't like this video, and let me know what you guys think. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.